Following their separation from Microsoft as a publishing partner in 2016, Remedy sought to reinvigorate themselves by creating a brand new IP, one which focused more on telling a large and complex story within a universe ripe for exploration. However, unlike their previous projects, they intended to develop this one in a more efficient and timely manner, all in an effort to keep their budget low while at the same time providing their players with a dynamic combat loop that encouraged replayability. In contrast to Alan Wake, which took around 7 years to complete, Remedy's newest game was completed within 3 years, with a budget far lower than the typical costs of a modern AAA game. Naturally, this resulted in a far less strenuous development cycle, and a game that was able to incorporate so much of what Remedy had mastered from prior projects without resulting in the game ending up an incoherent mess. As such, when it was finally released in 2019, Remedy was blessed with overwhelming praise from both critics and fans, with several gaming publications even naming it among their top games of the year. Furthermore, it was also nominated for numerous awards, winning several relating to the game's art and design. By February of 2024, it had managed to sell over 4 million units, making it a massive financial success. So how did Remedy do it? How did they manage to create one of the best action games in recent history? And how did it help pave the way for the return of one of their most beloved franchises? Well, let's find out. This is Control. Taking place within the oldest house, the home of the Federal Bureau of Control, you play as Jesse Faden, a drifter who spent the last 17 years searching for her brother Dylan, who was captured by the FBC back in their hometown during a supernatural event. Jesse, though, managed to escape capture thanks to the assistance of Polaris, a mysterious extra-dimensional entity that communicates with Jesse on a subconscious level. Thanks to their help, Jesse is able to locate the oldest house. But as she's beginning to search the building, Jesse soon discovers the lifeless body of Zachariah Trench, the previous director of the FBC, and she is instructed by Polaris to pick up his service weapon, a mystical handgun that can alter its design to the wielder's liking. The moment she does so, Jesse is transported to the astral plane, where the FBC's board appoints her as their new director, a position that she is not overly keen to accept, but Jesse doesn't really have much time to question why she was given this title, since once she returns to the material plane, she's attacked by FBC agents possessed by an entity known as the Hiss, a malevolent force hell-bent on escaping the oldest house and wreaking havoc upon the world. With the building on lockdown until the Hiss are dealt with and her brother trapped somewhere in this place, Jesse reluctantly agrees to aid the surviving FBC agents in helping to regain control of the oldest house and contain the Hiss, all the while searching for Dylan's whereabouts and slowly uncovering the mysteries of the FBC. When it comes to complex stories, Remedy has a bit of a penchant for creating games which on a surface level seem simple and easy to understand, but once you actually start diving into the game proper, you'll quickly realize just how densely layered their stories actually are. Control is no different. What starts out as a tale of a sister trying to find her brother gradually transforms into a full-blown conflict against an interdimensional monster, one that through Jesse is able to effectively explore the long-term consequences of childhood trauma and the careful steps one must take in order to overcome it. Not what you'd expect from a narrative deeply entrenched in cosmic horror, but Control takes care to make sure its players have a thorough understanding of its characters and setting before it starts diving into its more complex themes, all the while making sure to find the time to alleviate the tension with some well-placed humor. However, what I find impressive about the story is that so much isn't even told through the cutscenes, but rather through the environment. There are so many plot points, side stories, and little bits of lore regarding this world that you'd miss if you simply didn't look around. Remedy did a good job of making the FBC feel like its own self-contained universe. Of course, with such a heavy emphasis placed on exploration, this can result in some of the revelations in the story appearing seemingly without warning or proper build-up. But due to the inherent nature of this game's world, you'll naturally uncover these story beats in your own time, providing the narrative with an organic sense of discovery that perfectly complements its main character. Jesse spends the vast majority of this game asking questions and seeking to understand that which cannot be understood, all the while being burdened by the memories of her past and the newfound responsibilities that have been forced upon her. She is by no means an unwilling participant in this story's conflict, but as it becomes quite evident throughout the story, despite her incredible powers, she has a hard time recognizing the value in herself and struggles to live up to the trust others have in her. Yet as she descends further into the oldest house, she'll gradually grow alongside the player and start to see the value in herself, allowing her to better understand the flaws of her predecessor and seek to overcome them, becoming a more ideal director for the FBC, one that can inspire confidence in her supporters subordinates rather than fear. Thinking about it now, it's rather fitting then that the game is called Control, with a main antagonist that takes control away from others. Jessie is effectively spending the majority of this game fighting against the embodiment of her own trauma. Thus, she must undergo a journey of enlightenment in order to discover where her true strength lies.
Yippee, saatana. It happened in the last drop. I truly need an assistant.
Funny thing is, I've been a janitor. I'm more at home in that role than as the director.
In a way, the story of Control is a complete aversion of traditional cosmic horror narratives. Whereas in most typical stories, the main protagonist struggles to see the good in humanity, Control goes out of its way to remind its audience of how wonderful the world can be. Despite her tragic upbringing, Jessie can recognize the beauty present within the FBC as much as the horror. Remedy has taken the tropes often found within this genre and twisted them to fit a narrative that encourages a more hopeful outlook, setting the stage for a franchise that perfectly intersects with Remedy's other IPs whilst laying the groundwork for its own narrative. This is the kind of story that only a studio as creative as Remedy can create, and when you consider the source of their inspiration, it's hardly surprising that they'd be willing to go this far. Control was heavily influenced by the paranormal stories written about the SCP Foundation, a fictional organization created by an online community that dabbled in every genre of fiction. Everything from the secretive organization that studies the paranormal to the vast variety of weird and seemingly mundane items with supernatural abilities to the cold bureaucracy that acts for the greater good. All of these tropes and ideas can be traced back to the SCP Foundation, an online website that has had a stranglehold over the internet for well over 16 years. Frankly, it's kind of surprising that there hasn't been a proper AAA game set in this universe before. With its vast catalogue of stories, there would be plenty of ideas for any aspiring developer to call upon, yet so far only Containment Breach seems to have garnered any long-term acclaim. This is why it was such a big shock to me when I learned Remedy had taken inspiration from the SCP Foundation when creating the world of Control. For the first time ever, it felt like someone in the games industry had taken notice of one of the internet's oldest collaborative projects and sought to shine a spotlight on it, paving the way for a story that's able to evoke the mystique and absurdities of the SCP universe whilst remaining an entirely original IP. That being said though, if there was an issue to be found in Control's story, it would be regarding the side characters. I wouldn't say that any of them are badly written, but it's pretty clear that some of them had more of a presence within the game's narrative when compared to others. As a result, a large percentage of the game's cast can come off as quite forgettable. Artie and Dr. Darling are some of the best side characters Remedy has ever cooked up, however, they're sadly two of the only exceptions within this rather large supporting cast. The fact is, if a character isn't relevant to the overarching story, they either receive no development whatsoever or are simply there to set up the next plot MacGuffin, while their character and history are left to be found on some random documentation, making their inclusion within the story feel very underdeveloped, which when compared to Alan Wake is a bit disappointing. Despite its more linear narrative, Alan Wake made sure every side character in that game had a clearly defined personality, one which perfectly influenced their behavior throughout the story. That said, with the addition of the DLC expansion, some supporting characters did receive some extra screen time, but I wouldn't say it's enough to get a firm grasp of who most of them are as individuals. It says a lot that you get more personality from the altered items than you do from half of this game's cast. Still, this is an area that the sequel could end up rectifying. Remedy has shown that they are willing to commit to a single vision for their story, even if it takes them decades, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Regardless, if there's one thing Remedy has proven time after time, it's that they know how to write a crazy story that on paper shouldn't work, and somehow they make it work. Control is another case of them defying expectations, providing players with a mind-boggling tale that delves into the darkest parts of humanity without losing itself along the way, all the while laying the groundwork for some excellent third-person combat. Let it be said now that if your game lets me pick up random objects and throw them at people with no restraint, I will abuse the hell out of that mechanic. But if you also go the extra mile to make sure all the combat mechanics in your game are as enjoyable as your main character's gimmick, then needless to say, you'll earn my respect. Remedy could have easily made the shooting as generic as humanly possible and focused all their time on Jesse's supernatural powers. Yet instead, they chose to step up and make every facet of the combat as dynamic as possible. Unlike Alan Wake, which barely managed to hold itself together under the the weight of its own premise, here Remedy managed to create a combat loop that keeps players engaged in the moment-to-moment gameplay, encouraging creativity without resulting in them becoming so overpowered that every combat encounter becomes a breeze. The end result is a combat loop that is both incredibly rewarding and insanely addictive. The first tool that you'll acquire in your arsenal is the service weapon. On the surface, it appears to be just an odd-looking handgun, but in reality, it's an entire arsenal of weapons all melded together into one convenient package. While initially you can only use its original form, a simple revolver with high accuracy and single-shot damage, perfect for any occasion, as you progress through the game and acquire the right materials, you'll gradually unlock new weapon forms, allowing you to change the shooting style of your service weapon, from turning it into a laser gun, a short-range shotgun, or even a grenade launcher. All these forms are useful in their own way, and since Jesse can switch between any two weapon forms at any given time, you can adjust her loadout to suit any situation. Further customizations can also be applied through the use of modifications, both general and form-specific ones, allowing the service weapon's base capabilities to be greatly enhanced or tweaked to better fit a certain playstyle. In addition, each form can be upgraded twice to deal higher base damage and allow for more modifications. Of course, with such a versatile weapon at your disposal, Remedy had to take certain steps to ensure the player couldn't just abuse its power non-stop. In order to achieve this, they provided every weapon form with a limited number of shots, forcing players to carefully consider when and where they fire their gun. Furthermore, unlike other shooters, once you run out of ammo, you can't just find more scattered throughout your environment. Instead, in keeping with the supernatural theme, your gun's ammo will naturally regenerate on its own. But keep in mind that once you've emptied your clip, you have to wait a few seconds for more ammo, so you really have to make the most out of every shot. Thankfully, you can't just switch to your other readily available weapon form with a push of a button, so you're never really defenseless. This simple decision of limiting your firing capabilities allows one to easily recognize the importance of choosing which two weapon forms you use in combat and how you can better enhance them. Whether you decide to use forms and modifications that prioritize speed over power, allow you to target multiple enemies at once, or better complement Jesse's supernatural abilities is entirely up to you. Remedy has effectively given you free reign to customize your weaponry however you wish. Although considering the sheer diversity of enemies you encounter throughout this game, it's highly advised that you adapt your loadout to match your opponents. Taking over the residence of the oldest house has allowed the Hiss to adopt many complex forms, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Some attack from a distance with various weapons, while others are capable of mimicking Jesse's own telekinetic abilities. Then we have the more inhuman enemies that can charge at you with lightning fast speed, explode upon first contact, or even continuously heal all enemies within the local vicinity. Safe to say, Remedy really stepped up when it came to enemy diversity. As such, there will be many occasions where you'll need to drastically alter the dynamics of the battlefield if you hope to survive. This is where Jesse's supernatural abilities come in. Thanks to her connection to Polaris, Jesse is able to access an ever-growing arsenal of supernatural powers. Every new addition has the potential to drastically alter how you approach combat, causing you to reconsider how you look at the environment and the enemies within it. For example, the first power you unlock is called Launch, which is your traditional telekinetic grab attack. This allows you to seize objects in your environment and toss them at your enemies, an effective way to throw your opposition off balance, destroy shields, or even incapacitate large groups. But then later on, you acquire the Levitate ability, allowing Jesse to fly around the game world for a brief period of time, an ideal power for maneuvering around the game's large environments and gaining an edge during some of the more chaotic combat encounters. Nothing throws your opponents more off balance than a heavily armed wizard suddenly taking to the sky, a sight which is made even more terrifying if you were to suddenly start throwing shit at people. Seriously, half of the fun in Control is just taking advantage of the game's physics engine. That said, while certain powers are compulsory to progress through the main story, there are several others which can only be acquired in some of the game's side missions. These, while not as dynamic as Launch and Levitate, can drastically shake up the combat if employed correctly. You've got Evade, which allows Jesse to dash quickly across a short distance, avoiding danger but at the cost of some energy. You've got the Shield, which takes full advantage of the game's destructible environments, allowing you to form a barrier of random material to protect yourself. When upgraded, this barrier can even be turned into a powerful projectile projectile attack, ideal for stunning your opponents. And finally, there's Seize, which effectively turns the Hiss's brainwashing against them, transforming enemies into allies. An ideal ability if you're looking to take some of the heat off you in combat, or if you want some help dealing with a more powerful foe. In the right hands, any of these abilities can be exactly what you need to turn the tide against impossible odds. And if by chance you run out of ammo for your service weapon, then at least you have your powers to fall back on until your ammo regenerates. So there's never a moment where you're really without a weapon in this game, especially since you can pick up pretty much anything, and if by chance something is too heavy for you, then don't worry, you'll be able to pick it up later upon unlocking the correct skill. That said, even though you're given free reign to use these powers however you wish, one must always be mindful of their limits. Much like how Remedy had to take steps to balance out the service weapon, they also had to do the same for your supernatural abilities. All of your powers, with the exception of Levitate, are tied into an energy meter, which appears at the top of your HUD. Each of your powers will gradually remove chunks off of this bar, and should you run out of it completely, then you'll have to wait a few seconds before you're able to use your psychic abilities again. So despite the initial setup, much of this game is focused on managing one's resources, carefully utilizing a combination of gunplay and psychic powers in order to effectively wipe out your opposition. It helps that all of the combat mechanics have been streamlined for easier use, requiring very few button inputs from the player, which in turn ensures the moment-to-moment gameplay maintains a fast and yet elegant pace, ideal for a combat loop that can so drastically change at any given moment courtesy of an incredibly adaptive AI. Yet as difficult as the combat can be, Remedy made sure that the AI script was intelligent enough to challenge you but not completely overwhelm you. Since the vast majority of combat encounters are procedurally generated, Remedy had to develop a program that would determine the size and power of your opposition at any given time. This systemic AI is influenced by things like which area of the oldest house you're currently in, what level Jesse is at, and what kind of abilities you possess. This allows Control to maintain the right level of difficulty, ensuring the player gets to feel powerful in combat but not overpowered. Of course, with the right build and modifications, you can effectively prepare yourself for any surprises the Hiss might throw at you. That's right, much like your gun, you can also acquire personal mods that allow you to alter Jesse's powers and capabilities, like improving the strength of her shield, decreasing the amount of energy that certain abilities use, or even improving her health and energy regeneration rate. So with the right mods, you can effectively ensure that you never run out of energy for your powers, or basically transform Jesse into a psychic tank. This is easily the biggest strength with Control's combat. How you choose to approach every situation is entirely in your hands. Whether you choose to favor your guns over your powers, employ a wicked mixture of telekinesis and supernatural gunplay, or simply turn into the SCP equivalent of Jean Grey, it's entirely up to you. The game never once forces you down a particular route. Once you have access to Jesse's large arsenal of weapons, you have free reign to play however you wish. So if you want to tear the world apart and throw it back at your enemies with reckless abandon, then Control gives you plenty of opportunities to do so. The fact that Remedy is able to accomplish all this whilst also continuing to surprise and challenge gamers is simply impressive. To further complement this sense of freedom, Remedy went ahead and provided gamers with some stellar world design. Unlike their previous titles, which were more linear, Control's game world is built around the Metroidvania format, with a large world map that can be explored at a non-linear pace. Gradually, as the player completes the main story missions, they'll discover new areas of the oldest house, which will inevitably lead them in the direction of control points. These are key locations throughout the building, which are often swarming with enemies upon your arrival. But once they've been cleansed, you'll be able to use them to save your game, fast travel throughout the building, and upgrade Jesse's abilities, so it's always ideal to stop at these whenever you get the chance, especially since the control points are where you can find and complete board countermeasures, one of several types of randomized bonus challenges that can be found throughout the game. These ones are ideal since they have no time limit and can be completed at your leisure. Essentially, board countermeasures are little challenges that require you to play the game in a particular way, like killing enemies with a certain weapon or power. Upon completion, they can reward you with some resources or powerful modifications, making them an ideal method for acquiring acquiring materials to upgrade your weapons, so it's always best to check in on these whenever you get the chance. Aside from these, there are also bureau alerts, which are randomized tasks that spontaneously occur from time to time throughout the game. Once activated, you have to go to a specified location within the oldest house and battle a very large number of enemies. These can be an especially challenging endeavor, but the rewards for completion are far superior than those found from board countermeasures. Just be aware that unlike them, these tasks have a time limit, and should you die during an alert, then you won't be able to complete it. Instead, you'll have to wait until a new alert appears, which can potentially take hours. And finally, the last type of in-game challenge is the expedition. Unlike the last two, this one wasn't available in the base game, but it's easily the most complex of the three. In expeditions, players are transported to Quarry Site Beta, where they can earn rewards by completing objectives within a set amount of time. Essentially, it's a raid mode against endgame level enemies, so if you're looking for an extra bit of challenge after beating the game, then this would be ideal for you. Just be wary of the risks. Like any other open world game, as the player progresses through the story, gradually unlocking more areas of the oldest house, they'll be able to discover numerous side missions. These all offer a reward should you complete them, with some even providing you with new powers as mentioned earlier. Many of them usually ask the player to complete a wide range of objectives, from simple things like killing hordes of hiss and searching for survivors, to more complex tasks like challenging a stoplight to a game of red light green light, having a conversation with some plants, or fighting your own dark reflection. One of the benefits of having a setting this deeply entrenched in the supernatural is that it gives the writers free rein to come up with some of the most absurd side quests one can find in a video game. Like, I doubt anyone expected that one moment you'd be running around a room full of thousands of clocks and another you'd be fighting a giant hunk of mold. You can clearly tell the developers were having a lot of fun cooking up some of these side quests. But easily one of the most enjoyable aspects of the exploration is stumbling upon the many hidden areas throughout the oldest house. Unlike most of the core collectibles in this game, these ones don't appear on your map, so instead they need to be actively sought after. Ideally, you'll want to start looking for them once you get the levitate power, since this will allow you to properly scour every corner of this game's world for any hidden treasures, most of which you likely would have missed during any previous attempts at exploration. Something that is far more likely than you might first assume, especially when you consider how simplistic the map design is. Unlike other major open world titles, the map doesn't showcase every single inch of the game world. Instead, as befitting its story, Remedy went for a more old-fashioned design for its in-game maps. A more appropriate choice for the world of Control, but a frustrating design for any secret seekers. Difficulties aside though, if you need any further incentive for finding any hidden areas, just know that their discovery will usually result in you acquiring an ability point. Ideal if you intend to max out Jessie's ability tree and supercharge her powers, so you can simultaneously learn more about this insane world and level up. What more could you ask for?
It's a hideous trap my every thought made real. Fear, desire. How can I ever know for sure I've escaped and not just lost in my own fantasy of it? That thought alone can drive you insane.
So it's not exactly hard to understand why Control is regarded as one of the best third-person action games of 2019. Remedy has managed to craft a game world that encourages exploration, featuring a combat loop that rewards creativity and mastery of the game's mechanics, all the while being backed up by a plethora of side content that routinely updates itself to ensure the player is constantly being tested by an ever-evolving AI. In short, Control is a fun action game that you can easily get lost in for hours on end, and that's without even considering the DLC, which with just a few changes and new additions manages to push the game's mechanics even further into the stratosphere.
The third thing. The sound made darker, the darkness made louder. Hartman was stretched, like a worm through time. The third thing was a monster. Now we crashed out of darkness toward Faden.
With the successful release of the base game, Remedy maintained their momentum by releasing 2 DLC expansions, both of which were set post the main story. They each include new weapons and abilities for Jesse to uncover, whilst also providing more of the same mind-bending stories that players have come to expect from these developers. In the Foundation, Jesse descends into the depths of the oldest house in order to resolve an impending crisis. Along the way, she'll encounter enemies that she's never seen before, learn more about some of her co-workers, and achieve a greater understanding of the FBC's board. While in the OR expansion, Jesse receives a mysterious call from a long-lost novelist, leading her to the investigations sector where the Bureau closely examines altered world events. It's here that Jesse begins to experience firsthand the chaos that has unfolded in Bright Falls and the unhinged power of the Dark Presence, leading to a story that'll force you to question the very nature of the world which Jesse is a part of. Both narratives are well written and each go a long way to build up this interconnected universe that Remedy has been carefully crafting. Although of the two expansions available, I personally found Ore to be the more impressive edition, not simply because it's able to breathe new life into a once dead IP, but because it's able to transform an action-adventure game into a full-blown survival horror without needing to adjust any of its original mechanics. Control is able to perfectly integrate Alan Wake's gameplay without having to change anything about itself, leading to an expansion that is both challenging and unique. Something similar could be said of the Foundation, which has more of a focus on puzzles and platforming rather than combat. But when compared to Ore, it definitely feels like more of the same from the base game, which is hardly a bad thing. Far from it, I guess I was just expecting a few more surprises from the Foundation. Still, it's hard to find any reason not to play either piece of DLC. They each offer more of the same top tier content that Remedy provides. So I guess it ultimately comes down to whether or not you believe either expansion is worth the price of admission. I personally believe they are, but I'll leave you to judge for yourself.
Someone call a plumber.
The best way to describe Control's sound design would be otherworldly. From the soundtrack to the general audio utilized throughout the game, every ounce of Remedy's orchestra has been devoted to making the oldest house as ominous as humanly possible. From the sound of Jesse's footsteps echoing off the floors to the insane mantra of the hiss accompanied by a harsh red light, or even the loud ringing of the hotline that signals a new message from the board. Hell, even the darkness in the Ore expansion has the same familiar discomforting sound as it did in Alan Wake. So much of the sound design in this game is designed to make you feel as uncomfortable and out of place as Jesse is. So in order to balance out this unease, the developers also made sure to provide the player with plenty of more relaxing sound pieces and musical tracks, like the gentle chime of Polaris whenever she appears in Jesse's view, or Artie's soothing singing voice whenever you're close to one of his radios, or best of all, in one of the game's standout levels, the old gods of Asgard return to deliver yet another banger of a song. Seriously, those guys just can't help but steal the show whenever they show up. Yet it's rather telling that these moments of unease and relief are maintained by a soundtrack consisting mostly of ambient noise and synthesized sound effects that often appear just as quickly as they disappear. It goes a long way to set the stage for an otherworldly soundscape whilst also complementing the game's visuals. But it also speaks to the quality of Remedy's craft that they're able to pull all of this off with such simple sound design. It's quite remarkable how far video games have come regarding their visuals. Where once characters were nothing more than a collection of different sized blocks all woven together, we've now reached a point where any skilled developer can seamlessly blend live action cutscenes and computer generated visuals without any drawbacks. Granted, it's a style that's fallen out of fashion in recent years, but Remedy is keeping it alive. Thanks to the Northlight engine, Remedy is able to maintain a high degree of fidelity for character movements and facial expressions, as well as provide their game worlds with fully interactable environments that can show damage in real time. An ideal inclusion for a game whose combat loop focuses on manipulating one's environment for their own benefit. Along with this, Northlight also boasts global illumination, ray tracing, particle lighting, and real-time deterministic physics at a large scale, ensuring that their game looks good no matter the time of day. That said, while the visuals have certainly stepped up, aesthetics-wise, the whole game is very sparse. Control isn't like other mainline titles on the market these days with their lush and vibrant open worlds. There's no painstakingly recreated vistas of Baghdad to parkour through, no post-apocalyptic cities to wander about in, and no amazing views of alien planets to liberate from an empire. Instead, what you're confronted with is a very minimalistic world that reflects the day-to-day monotony of working in an office building. The visuals it gives you are striking in their simplicity. The only time the visuals become more dynamic is within the presence of the paranormal. Entities like the Hiss in Polaris feature some of the most complex visual patterns you'll see in the whole game, with their presence seemingly altering the world around them, a sentiment that's shared by the many altered items you'll find throughout the oldest house. Aside from these brief moments though, what you're often left with is more of the same simplicity, a stark reflection of the world outside the oldest house, one that has been spared knowledge of the otherworldly and left to wander in blissful ignorance. Simply put, whether with the graphics or the sound design, Control is a game that effectively proves that sometimes less is more. As a lifelong fan of internet horror, Control felt like a love letter to the countless absurdities that have spawned from the minds of people all over the web. Within this one game, Remedy manages to maintain the mystique and underlying terror of a universe full of the unexplained and incomprehensible without having to sacrifice complex writing and intense moment-to-moment gameplay. Thanks to the Northlight engine, Remedy can render dozens of enemies on screen in real time, whilst also adding any additional visual and sound effects without needing to hinder the overall experience. The various telekinetic powers you're given perfectly complement Jesse's range style of combat, while the numerous firing modes your service weapon has enables a level of flexibility that is rarely found in a genre overburdened with realism, resulting in an insanely addictive combat loop that encourages experimentation. With 2 post-game expansions and a plethora of other additional content and side quests to uncover within the vast depths of the oldest house, you can effectively lose yourself for hours within this world Remedy has crafted. There's no doubt in my mind, Control is easily one of Remedy's best video games to date, one with an extraordinary amount of replay value. I'm very eager to see where the sequel will take Jesse and the FBC next. Although, if Alan Wake 2 is anything to go by, then it's safe to assume that things are going to get much darker for the Federal Bureau of Control.